All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on the pros and cons of USDA's proposed rules for school nutrition. We encourage everyone, please introduce yourself in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. My name is Janelle Wojcik, and I am the program manager for LunchAssist, as well as your host for today. We're also happy that you could join us. All right, so first I'd like to introduce you all to today's speakers. We have Jennifer McNeil. She is one of the co-founders of LunchAssist and a self-proclaimed school lunch nerd. She is a dietitian and a former award-winning child nutrition director with over 12 years of school nutrition experience. Hello, Jen. Thanks for being here. Awesome. Next, we are joined by Mackenzie Lopez, also a co-founder of LunchAssist and a registered dietitian. Hi, Mackenzie. Awesome. And we also have Camille Biazzo, a school nutrition consultant here at LunchAssist. She's a former assistant director of school nutrition programs with the Montana State Agency. Hello, Camille. And finally, also joining us is the newest member of the LunchAssist squad, Jackie Roller. She's a former Montana State Agency reviewer and the newest school nutrition consultant here at LunchAssist. Hello, Jackie. Oh, great. So many people joining us today. This is awesome. So here's a little bit more about us. Here is our amazing, beautiful team here at LunchAssist. We work with about 400 districts nationwide through LunchAssist Pro training, resources, online courses, and one-on-one consulting services. I'm also super excited to share that we've just redone our online training portal, which was created in 2020 in response to increased training needs during COVID. It's now a completely custom learning management system that tracks compliance with professional standards and includes really fun, short, interactive training videos that our team creates. And we cover topics from civil rights to culinary skills and everything in between. And of course, all our training is available in both English and Spanish, which is another way we send love and support to the school nutrition community through accessible training materials. And we're so excited to be here with you today to go over these proposed rules and learn about what we could expect from these changes. So at the bottom of all your screens, you will see a little reaction button. It's like a little smiley face. If you click on that, you're going to find a heart there. So now you know a little bit more about us and LunchAssist. We want to get to know all of you a little bit. So I'd love for you to drop one of those hearts if you're from a school district or a charter school. So let's see them. Awesome. Great. And next up, if you are from a state or county agency, we'd love to see those hearts. Awesome. Great. And any partner organizations, nonprofits, community foundations, local farms, anyone else working in this community, show us some love there. Beautiful, amazing. It's so great to be here with all of you today, and thank you again for joining us. Yeah, so that's it from me for right now. So I think it's time to hand the virtual mic over to Jen to get this ball rolling.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Janelle, for kicking us off and for that lovely introduction. And thank you to all of you for being here with us today. It's so nice. We were joking. We were like, it's been a while since we've had a webinar like this. It feels like we're getting the band back together. So we're happy you're all here with us today. As Janelle mentioned, I'm Jen, and I'm one of the co-founders of LunchAssist, and I'm also a former school nutrition director. And yeah, we're here today to talk about the new meal standards. And for those of us who've worked in schools and live this every day, we know that there are very strict existing school meal standards that form the basis of and the framework of the 14 million school breakfasts and the 30 million school lunches that we serve to students every day. And that's a lot of meals. And when we're busy preparing and serving these meals, it's easy to forget that child nutrition programs are actually the second largest food assistance program in the US. It's pretty powerful, and it means that school meal programs are really this incredible food security safety net for families. And I know that's become even more apparent over the last few years with everything that's happened during the pandemic. But it's a good reminder for all of us. And it's also a good reminder that, that school meals are also the single healthiest place that Americans are eating. This is from a recent Tufts University study. And I want to throw this out there first and foremost, because a lot of us who've worked in the field for a while, we know that school meals have been becoming increasingly healthy over the last decade since the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act of 2010 went into effect, right? I've seen this change firsthand. I started as a supervisor and an assistant director and menu planner back in 2010 and helped implement a lot of those changes and learned really, firsthand about that process. And so it's interesting to be here again and seeing significant changes that would impact and potentially double down on some of the efforts to make school meals even healthier. Something that, I really want to make sure that we keep in mind, and a lot of us know who've worked in cafeterias, we know this to be true, is that we definitely need to balance these efforts with the need to continue to make meals appealing to our students. And we all know it's not good nutrition if the students don't eat it. So what exactly do they eat? Well, we know that there's meal components that fit into a meal pattern, and that is federally mandated to be based on the dietary guidelines for Americans. And this is why we're looking at these changes right now. And I had the great privilege, actually, definitely a career highlight, to get to speak with USDA Administrator Cindy Long in a one-on-one meeting the week that these new meal standards were released. And she and her team, they're not doing this because they want to make things more complicated for us, right? They're doing it because it's a federal mandate that they align the nutrition standards with the dietary guidelines. And they're really seeking stakeholder feedback and wanting to know how this, federal mandate can be balanced with what's feasible in our school meal programs. And the USDA team, I really do believe this, that they're 100% dedicated to making this alignment as feasible as possible for school meal programs and supporting schools. And that's part of the reason that, these rules are proposed, and then there's this public comment period, which has just been extended to May 10th. So this is a really exciting time for us to be able to provide some public comment and give our feedback to the team at USDA to help them form the final version of the rule. So what's in that big long rule? Today we're going to talk about 13 parts, and we have an agenda here of things that we're going to dissect and cover. I get the honor of covering the kind of the fun big win. So thank you everyone on my team for letting me do the fun part. And then I'll pass it over to the real experts, Camille and Jackie, who are our lovely former state agency team members who really will get to take us through some of the more controversial items and the policy guidelines around those as far as what we know now on those items. So let's get into it. The first one I want to cover, and this is our first big win that we're really excited about at LunchAssist, is relating to professional standards. And as a small business that provides training and workforce development for school nutrition professionals, we are all about elevating school nutrition professionals and helping everyone in the field advance their careers. And we're super excited about the proposed change that would allow school nutrition professionals to become directors in medium to large size districts with the prerequisite of having 10 years of experience. This eliminates the current requirement to have a college degree. And as we know, formal education is not the only way to gain expertise. Years of experience is also a great way, and sometimes an even better way, to gain expertise. And there's so many qualified school nutrition professionals who know the ins and outs of school meal programs, but since they don't have a college degree, they've been unable to advance their career. So there's a lot of people who have a lot to offer in leadership roles that are restricted by the current standards. And these proposed rules would eliminate a lot of those barriers and allow schools to hire well-qualified, experienced people to operate school nutrition programs. And I think another thing for us to remember is that this change will also help us retain really great people who love what they do and serve as motivation to school nutrition staff to stay working in school nutrition and gaining experience and aiming to work their way up to lead departments of all sizes. So it makes leadership more accessible, and overall, it's just a big win, and our team is super supportive of this change, and we hope you are too. Next up, let's look at another topic that's related to something many of us are passionate about, which is related to farm to school. So this proposed change is related to geographic preference, and it will allow schools to use the term local when writing bids and specifications and doing quotes for local foods. So just to kind of break this down a little bit, for example, right now, under the current rules, if a school would like to buy lettuce grown in their county, they are actually not allowed to specify local or specify, I want lettuce from Monterey County, for example. They can't do that in the current regulations. It's specifically not allowed. So this change would allow that, and it would be a big step forward for the farm to school movement to be able to actually specify local in our farm to school bids. So it's so cool. It's like just something that will really help propel farm to school and make it easier, make it make sense, right? We talk a lot about that at LunchAssist. This would help simplify the procurement process, which is a complicated topic that many of us, including myself, struggle to understand. And this will eliminate one of the complicated areas of procurement. Okay, moving right along here. The next proposed change will permit more culturally relevant meals by allowing tribally operated schools and those schools that serve a primarily American Indian or Alaskan Native children to serve vegetables in place of grains, and that's aligned with traditional dietary patterns. In addition, there's another part of this in the proposed rules that will it essentially codifies the language around traditional foods being allowed to be served in school meal programs. And someone on our team is asking this. If you're wondering what counts as traditional foods, those are defined by USDA. So that is typically things like wild game, meat, fish, seafood, marine mammals, and plants and berries. So that's all in some USDA codes. And then at the top here, USDA is also seeking feedback through the public comment process for additional ways to further improve school meals for American Indian and Alaskan Native children. So if you have ideas, please include those in your public comment, and also feel free to pop them in the chat. I don't think we mentioned this yet, but we're using the chat, and then in a minute we'll have some polls as well. And we're collecting some of your feedback to put into our public comment, because as an organization, we haven't finalized our public comment because we wanted to hear from you first and make sure it's reflective of our community. All right, moving on to some wins for plant-based meals. The proposed rule would allow nuts and seeds to credit as a full component, just like other protein sources. Under current regulations, nuts and seeds only credit for half of a meat alternate, and they must be served in combination with other protein-rich foods. And we actually had the honor of being able to be part of some advocacy that helped shuffle this one into the proposed rule. And so it's been really cool to see that process and know that USDA has been listening to advocacy throughout the last few years, and they've included some of these changes into the proposed rule. Along similar lines is another win for hummus and plant-based meals. So hummus will be allowed as a smart snack. I won't say too much more about this one, other than there are state-by-state restrictions on smart snacks and competitive foods. So it's a good moment for us to mention that about all the proposed rules. States have lots of different state-by-state regulations. So if something is a proposed rule and becomes a final rule, then also we always want to be looking to our state agencies to make sure that those finalized rules do trickle down to us in our individual states. So for example, California has stricter state-specific regulations on competitive foods, and so do some other states. So in those states, the state regulations might need to be changed a little bit to align with this rule if it becomes finalized. Okay, the final kind of win here is some proposed name changes. I'm not sure if everyone knows, but Mackenzie, our other co-founder, is engaged and she's getting married soon. So, we have proposals and weddings on the brain, and I guess so does USDA, because they have some proposed name changes in the final rule, or excuse me, in the proposed rule. So our favorite change, of course, is that the MMA is finally getting knocked out and replaced with protein sources. So if you aren't already aware, the current rules offer they call proteins meat alternates, which is shortened as MMA. And it's always just been this joke, like for when we get new people into school nutrition, they're like, MMA, you mean mixed martial arts? No, 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 that's what we call proteins. So it's just kind of nice that that's being eliminated. At least from our perspective, we're kind of excited about that one. Um, all right, so I'm about to hand it over to Camille to go in and Jackie to go into some of the more kind of controversial items. But before I do, I just want to lay a couple of ground rules as we go through the next ones and just preface our intention here. So as we go through the next few slides, we're really just aiming to outline some of the common pros and cons in a visually appealing way and like a concise way as well, because we have limited time with you. And I know we haven't captured all the pros and cons, and just because something has a lot of pros or a lot of cons, it doesn't mean it's a good or a bad rule. We're not trying to pass a judgment from on these. We're just kind of collecting some common things that school nutrition operators might consider pros and cons. So following each section, we will launch just a very quick 15-second poll. We didn't want it to take too much time, but we did want a organized way to allow you to kind of vote on some of these if you think you can pass that judgment, yes or no, I agree with it, I don't. And then what we will do is we will be collecting those. We'll share the results with those of you who are registered today, and then we will also utilize that feedback when we do our public comment from LunchAssist. So we'll be sharing that feedback with and those poll results with USDA. So we also welcome your input in the chat. I know we might not be able to get to everything in the chat, but we'll try to answer some of the questions later on in the Q&A and pull some of those comments into our public comment as well. So with that, I'll pass it over to Camille to walk us through the first one, which is added sugars.
Thank you, Jen, for that great overview of the wins and for taking out the pros and cons. So the first proposed rule we will be diving into some pros and cons on is for added sugars. As most of you know, there's currently no added sugar limit in the school nutrition program. So right now, schools can offer higher sugar items as long as they're still in compliance with those weekly calorie limits. We know that added sugars are not currently part of the school nutrition programs, but did you know that they actually are included in the dietary guidelines for Americans? This is part of why the USDA is proposing this new limit to better align with those guidelines. So the proposed added sugar rule really has two pieces. Before we go into the pros and cons, I'm going to describe each piece. So first, beginning in school year 25-26, the new rule would limit added sugars for grain-based desserts, cereals, yogurts, and milk. This means that the grain-based desserts, including items like cereal bars, donuts, toaster pastries, coffee cakes, all those items would be limited to no more than 2-ounce equivalents per week in breakfast, which is actually consistent with how lunch is currently run. The other items have item-specific added sugar limits. So that would include 6 grams per dry ounce for cereal, 12 grams added sugar per 6 ounce of yogurt, and 10 grams of added sugars per 8 fluid ounces of milk. So, and then part 2 of the proposed rule is to have also a weekly limit beginning in school year 27-28. And this weekly limit would work similarly to how the weekly limits for sodium are set up tracking wise. So for added sugar, that weekly limit would be less than 10% of total calories. All right, so let's get into the pros and cons for this first phase on item-specific added sugar limits. On the pro side, going back to those dietary guidelines for Americans, they indicate that about 70 to 80% of school-age children actually exceed the recommended limit for added sugars. Also, according to USDA, grain-based desserts are among the top 10 sources of added sugar at breakfast. So think things like granola bars, toaster pastries, sweet rolls. Also, ready-to-eat added or sweetened cereal is the number 2 source of added sugar at breakfast. And sweetened yogurt is among the top 10 sources of added sugar at breakfast. It's a lot of stats right there. So basically, this is all part of the proposed rule, trying to essentially target those highest sources of added sugars by focusing on grain-based desserts, cereals, yogurts, and milk. And this could potentially mean that there's more nutrient-dense food options that would be available to students, especially at breakfast. So overall, these new added sugar rules would mean school meals better align with those dietary guidelines for Americans. A couple other little pros that go along with this. There are already product-based sugar limits for CACFP, so this could help streamline requirements between those two programs. Plus, did you know that some USDA commodity sugar or yogurt is already in line with the CACFP sugar limits? So that's kind of a fun tip. All right, so now on to the cons. Let's begin with the most obvious con here. This is a new thing to track. Tracking added sugars would mean another new process to put in place to make sure that schools continue serving those reimbursable meals at breakfast and lunch. Also, the item-specific limits mean that there is less local control for operators to decide which products to serve. So we kind of mentioned earlier, under the current rules, schools could serve higher sugar items as long as they still fell within those weekly calorie limits. The area of operations probably most impacted by these item-specific changes is likely those like alternative breakfast models. So things like breakfast in the classroom, those tend to depend more on breakfast items like cereal bars, which would fall under this new proposed rule. Another possible con to this rule could be that industry might not be quite ready to provide lower sugar items, or they could maybe include artificial sweeteners, which depending on your views may also be a con. The reformulations may also impact the taste of the product, which might not be as accepted by your students. All right, that's a lot for phase one. Let's move into phase two, which is the weekly added sugar limits, where the added sugars would be no more than 10% of the calories throughout the week. So similar to item-specific pros, you can see this option also puts school meals in alignment with the dietary guidelines, which recommends less than 10% of total calories per day come from those added sugars. The proposed limits also potentially carve out more space for schools to offer those more nutrient-dense options, particularly at breakfast. Another perk of implementing this in two parts is that it could give the food industry a little bit more time to kind of develop and put together those new compliant products. Because remember, so those product-based limits, they would go into effect school year 25-26, and then these weekly limits, so like phase two, wouldn't go into effect until school year 27-28. So there's a little bit of time between those two phases. So on the other side of things, looking at the cons, the two layers of this rule, the per item tracking plus the weekly tracking component can further complicate school meal planning. There could also be a cost involved with training staff and ensuring compliance with this new rule. Additionally, the weekly limits could put a greater emphasis on relying on nutrient analysis. And some of those smaller schools out there don't even use the nutrient analysis software. So the weekly tracking could be an even greater administrative burden for those schools. Finally, like the item-specific limits, the same issues may exist for industry. They may need to reformulate products, and this takes time, money, and it could impact flavor, which then could potentially impact meal participation. So this is it for the added sugars, pros and cons. And before we hop into the next section, we'd love to do 2 quick polls to get your feedback on these 2 parts of the rule. So we'll launch poll 1 in just a minute about the product-based limits. So we'd love to get your feedback on whether you support added sugars in those product-based limits. So phase 1, we'll give it a couple seconds here. I think we said like 15 to get some answers. Ooh, it looks like it's like 50-50 right now. Exciting to like watch it live. So. All right, I feel like we have a good, there we go. We have about a little bit more than half saying no to supporting those. So let's launch the second poll. So second poll is about phase 2. We want to launch that. All right, there we go. So do you support weekly added sugar limits beginning in school year 27-28? So those are that phase 2 of the added sugar limits. Being able to stay within that less than 10% range for part 2. All right, looking pretty similar here. Yep, a little bit more than half of you say no, you're not in support of those weekly added sugar limits. Awesome, and also thank you for sharing your feedback in the chat. So like Jen said, we really appreciate your feedback through all of this to help us develop our own comments. So that is it for added sugars. Let's move into going into the flavored milk section with Jackie.
Thanks, Camille. Okay, so next up is flavored milk, like Camille said. This one is something that specifically there's not only the request for public comment in general, but this one's kind of like voting for which team are you on, flavored milk or team plain milk. Proposal limits added sugars in flavored milk to no more than 10 grams per 8 fluid ounces, effective school year 25-26. This proposed added sugars standard would apply to milk served not only in the reimbursable lunches and breakfasts, but also for the sale of competitive beverages. Limiting the added sugar in flavored milk will align with the DGA recommendation that less than 10% of total calories per day come from added sugars. And on the plus side, many products, kind of like Camille had already mentioned, already meet this requirement. For reference, 10 grams of added sugar is about 2 teaspoons of sugar. This proposal recognizes that some sweetness may need to be added and necessary to encourage milk consumption. But for those products that do not meet the standard already, it may take industry time to do research and development in order to reformulate products. By looking at added sugar, education for staff may need to be done to show how to distinguish between total sugars from added sugars. And schools may also find the need to switch milk brands, which, as we all know, comes with its own logistical and procurement related challenges. On a side note on limiting added sugars in California, our dairy industry is really amazing. They've done a great job of reducing the sugar in flavored milk already. It's about 6 grams, and some dairies are dropping down to even 5 grams of added sugar. So it's really not much added sugar, about 5 grams per carton, and it's all real sugar. So there's no high fructose corn syrup or anything like that. Just so you know, California schools are pretty much already complying with that limiting added sugar. So the USDA, they have created 2 options. Let's see. Yep. Basically, they have 2 options that they're proposing to us, and they're asking for public comment, and we'll base their final rule on public comment specifically. So first we'll talk about option A, which is to limit the added sugars in flavored milk and only allow it for grades 9 through 12. Knowing that milk is the highest source of added sugar in school meals, contributing nearly 50% of added sugar at lunch and 30% at breakfast, this could potentially lessen the sugar in school meals at those lower grades, which in turn would align with those DGA recommendation of less than 10% total calories per day from added sugar. This will also reduce the young children's exposure to added sugar while they're still developing those taste preferences. On the flip side, milk provides additional nutrients like calcium, protein, vitamin D, and is a good source of hydration. By limiting the flavored milk option to those lower grades, students who would regularly take a flavored milk might not choose a milk at all, meaning those students will miss out on those important nutrients. It would also add another layer of planning and possible confusion by not staying consistent between grades. Next up is option B, which is still limiting the added sugars in the flavored milk, but it would allow it for grades K through 12, just like it is now. This option will help limit the sugar while keeping the flavored option and will allow program operators to continue to have flexibility they're used to. The downside to this one is that it doesn't align with those DGA recommendations that we discussed. So Do you have other thoughts on how to approach the flavored milk in schools? Maybe allow it for both middle and high school? Or do you know ways or have ideas of how to improve the fluid milk substitution process? Let the USDA know in this public comment. They really want to hear your perspective. Once again, we're going to do a quick poll to get your feedback on what your thoughts are on this rule, proposed rule. Very good. Lots of answers here. Most people are really leaning towards allowing it for K through 12, but still limiting it, which is great. Nice. So, yep, it looks like everybody, not everybody, everybody's leaning towards reducing, but allowing it in the K through 12. So I'll let Neil talk about the next rule.
Thank you, Jackie. So moving on to grains. So if some of you have been working in the school nutrition world for quite a while, you may know that the grains requirement has changed a lot back and forth throughout the last 10 years. And if you remember back to the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act, the rule was actually 100% of grains must be whole grain rich. Anyway, so the current question here is whether to keep the current standards where 80% of the grains served each week must be whole grain rich, or to have a new option where it's more based on the days of the week, where one day per week schools would get to offer enriched grains and the rest of the days would have to be whole grain rich foods. So starting off with this first option, keeping the current 80% standard, let's dig into the pros side. So first of all, this is the current rule, so there would not need to be any new changes to your operations. As long as you were already meeting the 80% whole grain rich rule. Sometimes no change is nice, right? So your staff are already trained on this requirement and your current menu planning practices should already be in place to meet this. Pretty easy. I'm going to bring up the dietary guidelines for Americans again. So this option supports fiber-rich foods by ensuring that at least 80% of those grains offered are whole grain rich. This isn't 100% in alignment with the dietary guidelines for Americans, which recommends at least half of total grains should be whole grains, not whole grain rich, but it's still encouraging whole grains. So we like to see that. Onto the con side. So if you're a dietitian or really into nutrition like me, one con could be that this requirement isn't as nutritionally strong as the original Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act requirement of 100% whole grain rich. Whole grains can be a really great source of things like fiber. So like I mentioned, by having more whole grain rich items, there could be a better shot at children consuming more nutrient dense foods. All right, let's move on to option B. So this is the new option, and it lets you pick one day a week to offer your enriched grain option instead of a percentage over the course of the week, like what we're currently doing. So looking at the pros, this option could simplify the process of tracking the amount of enriched grains offered throughout the week. This could be especially useful for those smaller districts without menu planning software or a registered dietitian on staff to track that. Because this doesn't require tracking a percentage throughout the week, it could also be easier to train staff on this option. Another perk could be that the enriched grains wouldn't be offered in competition with the whole grain rich items on a daily basis, since under this rule or proposed option, since schools could only offer the enriched grains one day per week per program. So flipping over to the con side, similar to option A, from a nutrition view, not as strong as the original 100% whole grain rich rule. Another con is, well, this is a change from the current rule of 80%. The final potential con we have listed here is that the rule isn't super clear on how this would work if you have like multiple service setups, or it wasn't super clear if you have to offer the enriched grains on the same day for breakfast and lunch. So this is another great way you can actually comment on the USDA rules. You can provide areas that need further clarification in your comment. All right. It's poll time again, so we'd love to get your feedback on the grains and which option you support. So either option A, keep this current standard 80%, or option B, allow enriched grains 1 day per week, and then the rest of the week you have to do whole grain rich. Or if you don't like either option, you can say neither, or if you don't know, you can be unsure. So looks like people really know their answer here. So most people are leaning toward let's just keep things the way they are. So you can see that right here. But some people are willing to test out the enriched grain option for 1 day per week. All right, so let's go back to Jackie to talk about sodium.
Perfect. Okay, on to sodium. With this, we will see further reduction in sodium at breakfast and lunch starting in school year 25-26. So the more strict sodium limits will align with those DGA recommendations, limiting sodium to children. With 1 in 6 kids affected by high blood pressure and an average of 48% higher than recommended intake of sodium in students, the proposed rule will decrease the child's high exposure to sodium, which is important as taste preferences are still developing at those younger ages. Some cons to this proposed rule is the limits do not differentiate between natural occurring sodium in foods like milk and cheese versus added sodium. For programs that don't do scratch cooking, this rule may be more difficult to follow, as packaged foods tend to be higher in sodium compared to those scratch made items. With that, industry may struggle to provide foods that not only meet the more strict sodium goals, but also meet the satisfaction of the customer, as low sodium packaged foods may not be as well liked by the kids. It's important to note that while these guidelines encourage scratch cooking, not all facilities have the staff or equipment to achieve this. This start in decreasing sodium would go into effect school year 25-26 and would be fully implemented by school year 29-30. The USDA wants to know your thoughts on this timeframe too. Is 5 years enough to decrease to get to those goals? Again, we're going to do another poll to get your feedback on and your thoughts on this rule proposal on sodium. Okay. My poll results disappeared, so I can't see the live version, but that's okay. They'll pop up for me in a second. Okay, so the results are in, and people are leaning towards not supporting this. So once again, if you do have a time frame in mind, you can put that in the public comment as well. So I'm gonna move it back over to Camille.
All right, so next up is the NSLP snacks. Another proposed change is to align the NSLP snack meal pattern with the CACFP snack. So this is kind of an easy change, just aligning some of those regulations. So there's really one main snack meal pattern to follow. For the pros side, the main way we see this as a possible positive is how this will streamline the requirements between those two snack programs, NSLP snack and CACFP snack. The fewer the differences between the programs, the better sometimes, less confusion if you're doing both programs. This also means that staff training will be easier as well, so that's nice. The biggest change for those who are more familiar, it'll be for those who are more familiar with the NSLP snack, is the elimination of grain-based desserts, which on the pro side means the meal pattern aligns better with those dietary guidelines. On the con side, this would be a slight change in operations from how NSLP snack only operators currently run their programs. So there would be more staff training involved for this group. The other potential con is how the grain-based desserts would be eliminated under the NSLP snack for this proposed rule if it goes through, which could reduce the variety of options that are typically provided through that NSLP snack. All right, this was a quick one. So it's poll time again. We'd love your feedback on the proposed rule for NSLP snacks. So do you support aligning the snack meal pattern for NSLP with the CACFP meal pattern? We'll give it a few seconds. All right. Looks like, oh, it said it wouldn't let me share the poll. It says that most of you say yes, you are in favor of that. All right, let's move on to Jackie. Veggies at breakfast.
Perfect. So, veggies at breakfast. This one includes more flexible language around allowing veggies at breakfast and making sure that there's a variety of colorful vegetables throughout the week and would go into effect school year 24-25. We love our veggies, and this will help promote a variety of veggies offered to align with the DGA recommendations of including veggies from the 5 subgroups while still being able to offer the favored starchy vegetables at breakfast. Nearly 90% of Americans fail to get enough veggies each day. This rule will help promote a variety of nutrients at breakfast and encourage students to eat more veggies to get to that recommended 2.5 cups a day. The downside to this is that not all veggies are what we would consider breakfast veggies, and it is more strict than the current flexibility, allowing schools to credit any vegetable breakfast during the school year 22-23. So that one was a quick one. Let's do a quick poll to see your thoughts on veggie roll. Oh, it's very, very halfway. Kind of a split vote here. Nice. Perfect. So yeah, 53. Oh, I can't do that either. 53% are saying yes and 39 no, with some unsure. So that's great. We'll pass it back to Camille for the last one.
All right, fantastic. Thanks for sticking with us this far. We've been through a lot of different pros and cons on a lot of different topics. So the final one that we're going to dive into is related to the Buy American provision. So a quick recap of what you currently have to do. So the current regulation requires schools to purchase domestic commodities or products to the maximum extent practicable, with limited exceptions, such as if the product is not produced or manufactured in the United States in sufficient or reasonable amounts, or if you do a competitive bid and the cost of that domestic product is much higher than the non-domestic. So that's currently how things work. So for the proposed changes to this rule, this one is a little bit more technical, but overall it likely would add more restrictions and tracking on school nutrition directors when they purchase things like bananas. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, we've been going through everything with pros and cons, but it might be difficult to track. So the proposed rule is to implement a 5% ceiling on the non-domestic commercial foods that a school purchases each year. The other important piece of the proposed change is related to maintaining the documentation, supporting the use of one of the 2 limited exceptions while staying within that 5% threshold. And remember, those exceptions, are if they aren't produced or grown in enough quantity, or if they're significantly more expensive. So as you can see on the pro side, the proposed rule does offer a bit more clarity for the intent of what this Buy American provision is all about, and it also shows some support for American farmers and ranchers. On the other side of things, there is potentially a higher administrative burden and potential cost to comply with this rule. So, for example, most program operators likely do not have a system in place right now to track domestic versus non-domestic item costs to ensure that the non-domestic items account for only 5% or less of total annual commercial food costs. Additionally, the regulatory language in this proposed rule is not like 100% clear on how the documentation tracking will change. The rule does mention that schools would not have to document each use of an exception, but would instead only maintain documentation that shows that no more than 5% of their total annual food costs were for the non-domestic food purchases, using one of those two limited exceptions. So this part of the change could potentially be a pro if it simply means indicating a reason code or something like that for using the exception versus collecting and keeping on file each of those exceptions, as long as that total amount spent is below 5% in total costs. Okay, so that is it for the pros and cons that we are covering today. We'd like to do one final poll, this one on Buy American, to get your feedback to help us with our process of developing our comments. So do you support the change to limit non-domestic food purchases to 5% of the total food budget? I feel like this one's going to be a really easy one. I've already seen the results come in. So most of you are saying no. Some are unsure. It is a little bit of like, you know, a trickier one where a piece of this isn't 100% clear. So like we talked about earlier, you can put in your comment that you'd like clarity in how this would be tracked. So, all right, so it looks like the final results are in. So most of you say no. Thank you for your answers and for sharing your views on this. We really appreciate it. So let's now get into how you actually share that feedback with USDA. So I will pass it over to Mackenzie.
Thanks, Camille and Jackie, for breaking down all of that pretty quickly. And I know we went through quite a bit of information. So our intention is to share the slide deck. You should all have access to it now, and maybe perhaps consider downloading the slide deck, taking some notes. You can refer to some of the examples and thoughts we jotted down, refer to some of the chat box comments. I want to say thank you to everyone for leaving your comments in the chat box. We really wanted to facilitate a discussion here to really fully represent all of the different perspectives that will be affected by these proposed rules. And they are complex. You know, there's not going to be a simple answer to any one of these. And unfortunately, it's probably not one of those situations where every single person is going to be happy with the outcome. But the goal is to try and find some middle ground. So this is where USDA is really giving us an opportunity to provide feedback based on our experience. So a lot of these rules were developed based on more like textbook guidelines, which are great and have valid, but where we have an opportunity is to provide some insight into what we have experienced on the ground. What do we see in terms of what children are eating? What kinds of effects are we seeing in regards to food waste as a result of changes like this? So we encourage you all to comment by May 10th. And we have a couple of tips for you. So first of all, how to leave a comment. It's pretty easy. You'll just go to regulations.gov and there's a search box there. You can type in child nutrition programs, or you can type in meal patterns, and it should pull up a result like the box on the right that shows the full name and a button to comment. Now, in these comments, you can comment on specific regulations that are up for proposal. You can also share your opinions. I saw lots of opinions in the chat box about education being important, or funding for more scratch cooking, or some of these other areas that are really important in addressing these concerns. USDA has also released a set of questions that are available if you would like to tackle some of these questions. So the next few slides, I'm going to breeze through pretty quickly. Like I said, feel free to download the presentation, refer to them when you're drafting your own comments. But these are the questions that USDA specifically has regarding some of these areas. So they do want feedback from a variety of people, including menu planners and food service directors. And they want to know things like, what is the impact of the proposed added sugars? And are the timelines long enough? And there are some alternative options that aren't as obvious. So for example, I remember reading one for the milk. There is a potential option if you think maybe limiting added sugars in milk from grades K through 5 is great, but maybe adding flavored milk as an option at the middle school and the high school option would be a better, like, third option. go ahead and leave a comment. It's pretty wide and open-ended for you to share your opinions. And on these slides are all the questions that USDA has, and just things that they would love some extra feedback on. So feel free to take a look at these. They're a really great reference if you're new to leaving comments on proposed rules and aren't really sure where to start. Take a look at these. Otherwise, you can totally craft your own, go from there, and we will be sharing our own final version of our comments with you all via our newsletter that Janelle is going to speak to in a moment, but you can also look at ours for inspiration. And like I said, craft your own, because it's going to vary widely. You know, we've got large districts, small districts, industry members, dietitians, chefs. We have such a variety of perspectives, and it's going to be a really messy, beautiful combination of comments. And hopefully the final product is a nice middle ground that, you know, provides better results for the kids. That's what we all want. So I will pass it off to Janelle, and she's going to wrap us up here before we go into some Q&A.
Thank you so much, Mackenzie, and thank you, Camille and Jackie and Jen, for all of this helpful information, and of course your vast knowledge on these topics. Before we move on to the Q&A portion of today's call, I know there's been a lot of questions in the chat about the slide deck and the recording and the resources and everything. I just want to let everyone know we'll be sending a recap email out that's going to contain all that information. Jen's also been dropping a document in the chat. If you just can't wait and you want to check some of that stuff out, that's in there for you as well. And we'll be including lots of great resources, including this really wonderful one from No Kid Hungry that has information on how to comment on proposed rules. And you can also read more on the USDA website, where the full 300-page proposed rule is available. And there's also a really helpful chart that can be referenced to see what has changed. And as Mackenzie mentioned, if you haven't already signed up for the LunchAssist newsletter, it's a great way to stay in touch with us. We're always sending out fun memes and silly jokes, and of course, squeezing in a little bit of policy and training and resources in between.
I'm not sure if Janelle's frozen, just on, is she frozen? Okay, I'll jump in. So lastly, we did want to share a piece of exciting news. Recently, USDA selected LunchAssist and Boise State as one of 4 teams to lead the $50 million School Food Systems Transformation Challenge subgrants initiative, which is a mouthful. But basically, we will provide funding and support to 70 school districts nationwide over the next 5 years. So our dream team is led by Dr. Lindsay Turner at Boise State and includes partners at Johns Hopkins, Duke, National Farm to School Network, Masonic Partners, Old Grove Farms, Food Corps, Center for Ecoliteracy, and others. We're so excited, and so stay tuned for more updates on this, especially if you are potentially interested in applying. We will be sending out much more information. Just very excited, wanted to share that. Lastly, one of the universal cons for these changes is the fact that staff will need to be retrained on the topics one way or the other. There's lots of proposed changes coming our way, and that means more staff training. So enter LunchAssist. Luckily, our team at LunchAssist is hard at work at creating new, short, fun, 5 to 15-minute training videos that are part of our training platform that also provides a unique professional standards tracking tool. And you better believe that as soon as these rules are finalized, we will be updating and creating new pro trainings to reflect the changes in both English and Spanish. So if you haven't already, we invite you to join LunchAssist Pro and help us put the pro in professional development. We have many wonderful experts on our team and hundreds of resources to help you navigate these changes. And it also supports us in our efforts to offer free services like today's webinar. Lastly, let's drop some hearts for some virtual love for our school lunch heroes on the call today. You all have taken time out of your very busy schedules to stop and think about how we can better serve our children, and that is amazing. So thank you all. And with that, I am going to open up the floor to Q&A, and we'll get started with what's already coming in through the chat box. All right, am I frozen? No. Okay, good. Everyone's just really still. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the screen share here and go back into gallery mode so we can see all of your lovely faces. First question. So maybe this is a good one for Jen. If someone asks, oh wait, no, let's see. Let's go to this one. I think we still need a number for what makes a medium-sized district. I know that someone answered the question about what makes a large-sized district. I think that was over 10,000 students. Did the question get answered about medium-sized districts?
I actually have that resource handy. I was looking at it last night. I think it's actually, I can throw it in the chat. I want to say, let me see. Yeah, it's still open on my computer. It's 25. So medium would be 2,500 to 9,999. And this is a great resource from SNA that I have open on my desktop, and I'll just drag and drop that into the chat. So that shows the current professional standards. And those sizes of districts won't be changing. What will be changing is that the medium and large size districts will be able to hire directors that have 10 years of experience in lieu of the current requirements, which require a college degree, either an associate's or a bachelor's degree right now.
Okay, thanks. Next, the nuts and seeds regulations. Does the next nuts and seeds flexibility, would this be allowable for nut milks as well? Does someone want to chime in on that?
So I can chime on the question about the nuts and seeds. So there was a proposed change that we talked about kind of at the top, which was about allowing nuts and seeds to count as a full creditable component. That's for the meat alternate, which is becoming the protein sources component, right? So that's just for like your regular like sunflower seeds and things like that, not for nut milks. There is some discussion in the proposed rules about fluid milk substitutions, like your soy milk, for example. There's nothing in the proposed rule that allows any other kind of like, almond milk or nut and seed milks, but because they don't count as nutritionally equivalent to milk. And Camille and Jackie, I don't know if you guys want to add anything else onto anything that you might have read about the fluid milk substitutions and any changes about those. No. No, so that's all pretty much.
Yeah, so USDA is also in their questions in the fluid milk section or in the milk section. They also would like feedback about the milk substitution form and how that process goes with parents, and if that is working well, if it's not. That's something else that was very minor. It's kind of like embedded in their little questions that I shared at the end of the presentation. But if anyone has any opinions about that fluid milk substitution form and that process around submitting that, USDA is also looking for feedback on that area. All right, so
perfect, thanks.
Next question, I know this one is definitely a source of confusion, which probably means that there's going to be a lot of training needed on this topic, but it has to do with added sugars and like what exactly are added sugars? How are they different from total sugars? How are they tracked and reported by the food industry? And are they different from the natural sugars in fruit? So it can be very confusing and probably warrants a little training video on it, to be honest. We'll add it to our list. But in short, all of the proposed changes around sugars are in respect to added sugars. So these are sugars that manufacturers are adding to a food item, usually a processed item like a granola bar or a pastry or in bread or things like that, where sugar is getting added in. This does not include the natural sugars found in lactose in milk or the natural sugars found in fruit. So there is some differentiation there. So in regards to the added sugars component, that is really like that 10 grams limit, I think, for the milk. That is in regard to sugar that's added in on top of what's naturally occurring. So hopefully that clarifies some questions that folks have around that. It is a tricky one, and probably one that would require a bit of training for staff and people across the board. That's just like it's not the most intuitive concept.
Yeah, and it's kind of a new concept. There's some great resources from FDA that I dropped in the chat about the definition of added sugar on the new nutrition facts label. So that's been a new requirement to be added to the nutrition facts label. I did hear some people talking about this, and I think I'm not totally sure, but I'm wondering if USDA needs to kind of explicitly state which definition of added sugars they're utilizing, like if the added sugar for school meals aligns with the FDA definition. I reckon it would, but I'm not totally sure. That is a good question. But in general, it should pretty much align very closely with that. And that'll be something definitely that our food manufacturer is on the call. If anyone's here from the food manufacturer, shout out to you guys. You're going to be doing a lot of work on this one. And we really appreciate it and need that support from our food manufacturers. So that'll be something that they'll need to clarify with their R&D teams to make sure that they're crediting and calculating that correctly, right? So
I think that's most of the questions that we had flagged that hadn't gotten answered, but the chat box was going pretty quickly. So if we missed some, if you have a question that hasn't been answered yet, feel free to either come off chat or enter into the chat box. I do recognize we're right at time, so if you need to jump off, go for it. We'll be sharing a recording as well. We're also happy to stay on the call for another few minutes to answer any questions that we haven't got to.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us. We really appreciate it. I'm also going to pop one more thing into the chat just in case anyone was also wondering about, there's another proposed rule about CEP regulations, and there's a link to that. So I don't know if that was on anyone's mind. I had that kind of queued up in case someone asked. And so I'll just put that in the chat too. We didn't cover that today, but we will put some details about that in our weekly newsletter. So definitely join the weekly newsletter. It's a free update where we list policy updates and we offer a lot of nice resources. Yeah, it's just a lovely way to connect each week. You get a cute little email from us. Yeah, I'll put that in the chat as well, so you can learn about the CEP rules.
All right, I'm gonna just jump in and tackle a couple of these other questions that are popping up here. So Rebecca, I see you asked how involved are the manufacturers in knowing about these proposed changes. And I would say, I think that I recently have attended a few conferences, and I know Camille and Mike from our team have as well, the legislative action conferences at the federal level and at the state level. And I was really pleased to see a lot of our industry members there as well, advocating and sharing their opinions and joining and being part of the discussion. So from what I've seen so far, I think that there's been some involvement there from the industry. I'm sure more is always better, just like more school nutrition professionals can probably also increase their participation in this process. But I've also seen a few webinars that are a little bit more specific to the industry side. So I believe they are being updated about these changes. If anyone else has any comments, they can jump in on that. Next, Kat had a great question, Kat from Truckee Tahoe. As this one, I'm really curious. I haven't personally seen research on this. I'm really curious if anybody else has seen any statistics or has experienced this based on what they've seen in their program. If they've has CACFP participation declined as a result of grain-based dessert policy changes and added sugars? Anyone have any thoughts on that?
I can jump in while we're waiting for people to chime in on that. That's a great question. And also, hi, Kat. Thanks for joining. The CACFP ones, I will say I've seen those kind of being implemented and done a lot of training on those with California Department of Social Services over the last several years. And the yogurt and the cereal seems to be a pretty easy implementation for a lot of the CACFP providers. But I think that it is a little bit of a struggle sometimes with the grain-based desserts from what I've seen, just from my perspective. But I think that would be wonderful data to pull and to see, and would invite anyone else to chime in as well if you have any thoughts or ideas on that. It does seem like the lower sugar cereals, which is 6 grams of sugar or less per dry ounce in most cases, and then the lower sugar yogurts are widely available already. especially the sugars, because it aligns with the WIC standards. So those do seem to be pretty widely available. And the good thing is that from the manufacturer standpoint, those don't really require reformulations because they're already in existence. I think those proposed rules or those final rules with CACFP have been in effect since around 2017. They were like phased in a little bit, but it was around 2017 when they first were going into effect. So it's been a while for those ones, and it's been not too bad, I think, for CACFP providers in general.
Okay, did I miss any other questions? I know there's some chatter about the CEP.
Yeah, and I can just mention that since it's in the chat. So, like we said, we didn't get a chance to talk about the CEP proposed rule. That's a completely separate proposed rule with this completely separate comment period that ends on the 8th of May. So that's not the focus of this webinar, but the groups like FRAC and No Kid Hungry have been doing some great webinars, and we'll go into more details in our weekly newsletter. Just real quick, because it was in the chat, so if, in case anyone's not watching the chat, we did share that the quick overview of that rule is that the CEP ISP would change the threshold to participate would lower so that the feds would allow states and schools to allow schools to participate if they only had 25% of identified students rather than the current threshold of 40. It's not something that's really financially viable for schools, but it would be because it doesn't change the reimbursement. But it allows more flexibility for states that have universal meal programs like California and Maine and Colorado and New Mexico and I can't remember who else, Minnesota. It's happening, people. So it allows more flexibility in those states so that schools might be able to limit the administrative burden. If they have universal meals anyway, then they could just jump on the CEP and not have to do applications, for example. So that's just a little like quick 30-second overview of those, but definitely tune into our newsletter and also check out like FRAC and No Kid Hungry have been doing some great educational webinars on this topic, and USDA has as well.
Thanks. I think we're probably wrapping up here. Oh, we got some pictures in the chat box. Love those. Is that cereals? Looks like cereals. They look delicious. And Kat, you had a comment about mealtime. Yeah, that's a pretty big deal. So, with these comment periods, you're also allowed to comment on things not in the proposed rule. So if you have ideas or comments about things that are not explicitly outlined in the proposed rule, you don't have too many avenues to directly communicate with USDA. So if you want to add in some extra details about mealtime or about education around nutrition, I saw a lot of comments about that, about the importance of education, not just limiting food choices. So, go for it. Just I would use this as an opportunity to this is your chance to chat with USDA. So feel free to chime in on some other things and put a little bug in their ear about other topics of interest that they do, they all sort of intersect and affect each other. So.
Yeah, we had a whole slide prepared, but we didn't want the webinar to go on for 3 hours about missed opportunities. And I know one of them, I see Sally Sparrow. Hey, Sally, in the chat. Sally's always been complaining about this one, and all of us know the breakfast offer versus serve and the food items. Like, I wish that would just get cleaned up, and I think we might identify that in our comments too as a missed opportunity. Like, hey, could we clean that up? Because it's really confusing that it's food items at breakfast and food components or meal components at lunch. So there's definitely some missed opportunities. And, I don't know how much of that comes down to that not enough of us have been speaking up about those. We don't have, most of us aren't lobbying on this like some other groups are. But there's some things like that you can include in your public comment, and then that'll start to collect feedback for USDA to potentially put into a future proposed rule, or, there could be some things that get added to the final rule as well. So yeah, that's there's a few of those that we've thought of as missed opportunities. So I'm sure you have a few in mind as well.
All right. Well, I think that probably about covers it for today. Thank you all for sharing all of your perspectives, your feedback. It has been so refreshing to get a chance to chat with you all and hear from you all directly. And we'll be putting out our statement soon, and look forward to seeing everyone else's statements too. So if anyone has any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. You can get a hold of us pretty easily, anyone on the team. So we're here to support you all and continue doing the work that support you and doing the work that you do and taking care of our kiddos. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Have a good rest of your day and take care. And thanks again for everything you do to feed the kids.